Welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight. If you're listening to this, it's probably late. Maybe you've been trying to fall asleep for a while, or maybe your mind won't stop thinking about tomorrow. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know this is a safe space. For the next while, we're going to walk through Pelican Town together, exploring its history, its people, its quiet stories of struggle and hope. We're going to spend time in this valley that so many of us love, understanding how it became what it is and what it might become again. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this content, a like would mean the world to me. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love knowing this reaches people all over the world, all of us finding comfort in the same gentle stories, the same quiet voices in the night. But there's no pressure. You don't have to do anything. You can just close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and let me tell you about a town that forgot its magic, and how one farmer might help them remember. Settle in. Get comfortable. Let your body sink into wherever you're resting. We're going to take this slowly, gently, letting each part of Pelican Town's story unfold at its own pace. If you drift off before we reach the end, that's perfect. That's exactly what this is for. I'll keep talking, and you can just let go. Let's begin with a question. What makes a town feel like home? Take a deep breath in, hold it gently, and let it out slowly, releasing any tension in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Pelican Town wasn't always called Pelican Town. The valley had other names before, names spoken by people who lived here long before the current residents, long before the buildings that stand now were even imagined. The land itself is ancient, carved by rivers that have since changed course, shaped by seasons beyond counting. The soil is rich, dark, perfect for growing things. The forest is old and deep, holding secrets that most people have forgotten. The mountains stand eternal, watching over everything with patient indifference. The first people who came to this valley came because the land called to them. Not in words, but in the way good land calls to farmers and builders and dreamers. They saw the fertile soil, the clean water, the protection offered by the mountains and the forest. They saw a place where they could build something lasting, something real. So they cleared the land, planted crops, built homes from wood and stone. They worked hard, these first settlers, but the land was generous in return. Crops grew tall and healthy. Animals thrived. The valley provided, and the people were grateful. Among these early settlers were families whose names you'd recognize if you walk through Pelican Town today. The ancestors of Pierre, of Robin, of Marnie. They came with nothing but determination and hope, and they built farms and homes and lives. They helped each other because that's what you did in those days. When someone's barn needed raising, everyone came to help. When someone's crops failed, neighbours shared what they had. The community wasn't just a nice idea, it was survival, it was necessity. It was the only way to make it through the hard winters and the difficult years. Let your breathing find its natural rhythm now, slow and steady, like the seasons changing in the valley, inevitable and peaceful. The town itself grew slowly, organically, the way towns do when they're not planned but simply emerge from need. Someone opened a general store because people needed supplies. Someone else opened a saloon because people needed a place to gather, to talk, to share their days over a drink. A blacksmith set up shop to repair tools and shoe horses. A doctor arrived because accidents happen and babies need delivering. Each business, each building, each addition to the town came because someone saw a need and filled it, because the community was growing and required these things to function. The community centre was built during this time of growth and optimism. It was a massive undertaking for such a small town, a building far grander than they strictly needed. But the people of Pelican Town wanted something special, something that would serve as the heart of their community for generations to come. They pooled their resources, donated materials, volunteered their labour. The construction took years, but when it was finally complete, the community centre stood as a testament to what people could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. The building was beautiful, designed with care and attention to detail. Large windows let in natural light. The main hall was spacious enough to host the entire town for gatherings and celebrations. There were smaller rooms for meetings, for classes, for quiet conversations. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Hand-carved wooden beams, carefully laid stone floors, decorative elements that showed the pride the builders took in their work. This wasn't just a functional building. This was art. This was love. This was a gift to future generations. And the Junimos blessed it. The forest spirits, ancient beings who had lived in the valley long before humans arrived, recognized the community centre as something special. They saw that the people of Pelican Town respected the land, worked with it rather than against it, took only what they needed and gave back what they could. So the Junimos wove their magic into the building's foundation, blessed it with prosperity and protection. As long as the community centre stood and served its purpose, as long as the community remained strong and connected, the valley would thrive. Let your eyes grow heavy now, if they aren't already. Let your eyelids feel weighted, comfortable, ready to stay closed. The early years of Pelican Town were golden years. The community centre hosted weddings where the entire town celebrated together, dancing until dawn, sharing food and laughter and joy. It hosted harvest festivals where farmers displayed their best crops, where children played games, where everyone gave thanks for another successful year. It hosted town meetings where decisions were made collectively, where everyone's voice mattered, where the future of Pelican Town was shaped by consensus rather than decree. The building was alive with purpose, with energy, with the constant flow of people coming together for 1,000 different reasons. The town had traditions in those days, rituals that marked the passage of time and strengthened the bonds between neighbours. Every spring there was a flower dance where young people paired off and danced together, a celebration of renewal and possibility. Every summer there was a luau on the beach where everyone contributed to a massive communal soup, a symbol of how individual contributions created something greater than the sum of its parts. Every fall there was a festival celebrating the harvest, with displays of the valley's bounty and competitions for the finest produce. Every winter there was a feast where the community gathered to share warmth and food during the coldest, darkest time of year. These weren't just parties or entertainment. These were the threads that wove the community together, that reminded everyone they were part of something larger than themselves, that gave meaning and structure to the year. Children grew up knowing these traditions, participating in them, understanding that they were part of a continuous story that stretched back to their grandparents and would continue forward to their grandchildren. There was comfort in that continuity, safety in that connection, identity in being part of Pelican Town. The farms around the town thrived during this golden age. The soil was rich, blessed by the Junimos' magic and tended with care by farmers who understood the land. Crops grew abundantly, wheat and corn and tomatoes and peppers and melons. Fruit trees produced heavily, apples and cherries and oranges and peaches. Animals were healthy and productive, cows giving rich milk. Chickens laying perfect eggs, pigs finding valuable truffles in the forest. The farmers worked hard, but the land rewarded that work generously, and there was always enough. Enough to feed their families, enough to sell at market, enough to share with neighbours who might be struggling. Your grandfather's farm was one of these thriving properties. He worked that land for decades, learning its moods and rhythms, understanding what it needed and what it could provide. He knew which fields were best for which crops, knew where the soil was richest, knew which trees produced the sweetest fruit. He raised animals with care and respect, treating them not as commodities but as partners in the work of farming. And the farm responded to that care, producing abundantly year after year, providing him with a good life and a deep sense of satisfaction. Your grandfather was part of the community in those golden years. He attended every festival, every gathering, every town meeting. He helped his neighbours when they needed it, and they helped him in return. He sold his produce at Pierre's grandfather's store, drank at the Stardrop saloon with the other farmers, participated in the traditions that made Pelican Town feel like home. He wasn't wealthy, but he was content. He had work that mattered, land that he loved, and a community that valued him. What more could anyone want? Let your jaw relax completely now. Let your tongue rest gently in your mouth. Let any tension in your face simply melt away. But nothing golden lasts forever. Change came to Pelican Town slowly, so gradually that people didn't notice it happening until it had already happened. It started with the young people leaving, the children who grew up in Pelican Town, who learned the traditions and worked the farms and seemed destined to continue the community's story, started looking beyond the valley. They heard about opportunities in the city, about jobs that paid more than farming, about lives that seemed more exciting than the quiet rhythms of rural existence. One by one they left. Some promised to return, and a few did, but most never came back. They built lives elsewhere, started families in distant places, and Pelican Town became something they visited occasionally rather than somewhere they belonged. The farms began to struggle as the younger generation departed. Farming is hard work, physically demanding, requiring strength and stamina that diminishes with age. The older farmers tried to keep up, tried to maintain their properties alone, but it became increasingly difficult. Fields that had once been carefully tended grew wild. Barns that had once housed dozens of animals stood half empty. Orchards that had once been meticulously pruned grew tangled and overgrown. The land was still generous, still willing to provide, but it needed people to work it, and those people were disappearing. The town's businesses felt the impact of this exodus. Fewer people meant fewer customers. Pierre's grandfather's store saw declining sales as families moved away or farms failed. The saloon had fewer patrons each year, the once lively evenings growing quieter and quieter. The doctor had fewer patients. The blacksmith had fewer tools to repair. Each business adapted as best it could, cutting costs, reducing inventory, finding ways to survive on less. But the vitality that had once characterized Pelican Town was fading, replaced by a sense of slow decline, of inevitable diminishment. The community centre began to see less use during this period of change. With fewer people in town, there were fewer events to host, fewer gatherings to organise. The spring flower dance still happened, but with fewer participants. The summer luau continued, but the crowd was smaller. The fall festival went on, but the displays were less impressive. The winter feast persisted, but the tables weren't as full. The traditions continued, but they felt hollow somehow, like everyone was going through the motions without the joy and connection that had once made them meaningful. The Junimos noticed this change. The forest spirits who had blessed the community centre, who had woven their magic into the valley's prosperity, felt the weakening of the community's bonds. The magic they had given was tied to the people's connection to each other and to the land. As that connection weakened, as people stopped gathering together, stopped working cooperatively, stopped maintaining the traditions that had defined Pelican Town, the Junimo's blessing began to fade. The crops grew less abundantly, the animals were less productive, the weather became less predictable. The valley was still beautiful, still capable of supporting life, but the magic that had made it exceptional was slowly disappearing. Your grandfather watched these changes with sadness, but also with understanding. He had lived long enough to know that nothing stays the same, that communities evolve and sometimes decline, that the world his grandchildren would inherit would be different from the one he had known. He kept working his farm as best he could, maintaining the traditions even when fewer people participated, holding on to the values that had made Pelican Town special, even as the town itself changed around him. He hoped that someday, somehow, the valley might remember what it had been, that the magic might return, that the community might heal. Let your breathing deepen now, each breath taking you further into relaxation, further into peace, further towards sleep. Then Joja Corporation arrived, and everything accelerated. The corporation had been expanding for years, building massive stores in cities and towns across the region, offering convenience and low prices that local businesses couldn't match. For a long time, Pelican Town seemed too small, too remote, too insignificant for Joja to bother with. But eventually the corporation's expansion reached even this quiet valley. They bought land on the edge of town, land that had once been farmland but had been abandoned when the family who owned it moved away. And they built a Joja Mart, a massive store that dwarfed every other building in Pelican Town. The Joja Mart offered everything: groceries, tools, seeds, supplies, all at prices lower than Pierre's general store could match. The store was open longer hours, had more selection, provided more convenience. For people who were struggling, who were trying to make ends meet on declining farm income or limited wages, the savings were significant. It was hard to justify paying more at Pierre's out of loyalty when Joja offered the same items for less. So people started shopping at Joja Mart. Not because they wanted to hurt Pierre, not because they didn't value local business, but because they needed to save money, because survival sometimes requires compromising on principles. Pierre fought back as best he could. He tried to match Joja's prices, but he couldn't. They had economies of scale he could never achieve. He tried to emphasize quality and personal service, but people were too tired and too broke to care about those things when they could save money at Joja. He tried to rally the community, to remind people that shopping local kept money in Pelican Town, supported their neighbours, maintained the town's independence. Some people listened, remained loyal, continued shopping at Pierre's despite the higher prices, but it wasn't enough. Sales declined year after year, and Pierre watched his family's business, the store his grandfather had built, slowly dying. The Joja Mart didn't just compete with Pierre's store, it changed the entire character of Pelican Town. Joja Corporation brought jobs, hiring locals to work in the store, and people were grateful for the employment. But the jobs were soul-crushing. Long hours, low pay, repetitive tasks, no autonomy or creativity or meaning. Employees like Shane and Sam worked at Joja Mart because they needed the money, but the work drained them, left them exhausted and depressed, feeling like cogs in a machine that didn't care about them as people. The corporation extracted value from them just as it extracted value from the town, taking more than it gave, leaving everyone a little bit emptier. Yoya's presence accelerated the decline of the community centre. With JojaMart providing a convenient place to shop and gather, people had even less reason to use the community centre. The building saw fewer and fewer events, fewer and fewer visitors. Maintenance was deferred because the town couldn't afford it, and no one seemed to care enough to volunteer their time. Windows broke and weren't repaired. The roof developed leaks that went unfixed. Dust accumulated in corners. The beautiful craftsmanship that had once been a source of pride became hidden under layers of neglect and decay. The Junimos retreated as the community centre fell into disrepair. The forest spirits who had blessed the building, who had tied their magic to the community's strength, could no longer maintain their presence in a place that had been abandoned. They withdrew into the forest, into hidden spaces where humans rarely ventured, and they waited. They didn't leave the valley entirely. This was their home, had been their home for far longer than humans had lived here. But they stopped actively blessing the land, stopped weaving their magic into the valley's prosperity. Without the Junimos blessing, without the community's connection, Pelican Town continued its slow decline into something that barely resembled what it had once been. Your grandfather's farm was one of the last to keep producing during this period of decline. He was old by then, his body worn down by decades of hard work, but he refused to give up. He still planted crops every spring, still tended his animals, still maintained the property as best he could. The farm didn't produce like it once had. The magic was fading, and he was only one person trying to do work that really required several. But he kept going. He kept going because the farm was his life. Because giving up would mean admitting that everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, had been for nothing. He kept going because he hoped that someday someone might come along who could restore what had been lost. Let your whole body feel heavy now, sinking into the mattress, held and supported, safe and warm. The railroad stopped running during this time. The train that had once connected Pelican Town to the wider world, that had brought visitors and commerce and connection, fell into disuse as the town's economy declined. There weren't enough passengers to justify the service, weren't enough goods being shipped to make the route profitable. So the railroad company abandoned the line, left the tracks to rust and the station to decay. The landslide that blocked the tracks was almost symbolic, a physical barrier representing the isolation that Pelican Town had fallen into, cut off from the outside world, forgotten by the larger society that had once valued it. The bus service barely continued. Pam, who'd been driving the bus for years, lost her route when the road to the desert was damaged, and no one bothered to repair it. She kept her job technically, kept getting paid a small stipend to maintain the bus and be ready if service resumed, but there was nowhere to drive, no passengers to transport. The bus sat in its station, slowly deteriorating, while Pam spent her days at the saloon, drinking away her frustration and purposelessness. She'd been a good driver once, had taken pride in her work, in connecting Pelican Town to other places. But without that purpose, without that role, she didn't know who she was anymore. The mines became too dangerous to work. The mines had once been a source of prosperity for Pelican Town, providing ore and gems that could be sold for good money. But as the community declined, as fewer people remained in town, the mines were neglected. Monsters that had always lived in the deeper levels began to spread upward, making the upper levels unsafe. Equipment broke down and wasn't replaced. Safety protocols were ignored. Eventually, after a serious accident that nearly killed several miners, the mines were officially closed. The entrance was left accessible, but everyone understood that entering was at your own risk, that no one would come to rescue you if something went wrong. By the time your grandfather wrote his letter, by the time he sealed the envelope that would eventually reach you in your cubicle at Joya Corporation, Pelican Town was a shadow of what it had been. The population had dwindled to a few dozen people, most of them older, most of them just waiting out their remaining years in a place that felt more like a graveyard than a community. The farms were mostly abandoned, the fields overgrown, the barns collapsing. The community centre was a ruin, its windows broken, its floors covered in dust and debris, its purpose forgotten. The traditions continued in diminished form, but they felt like echoes of something that had died, rituals performed out of habit rather than meaning. Your grandfather knew he was dying. He could feel his body failing, could sense that he didn't have much time left. And he thought about his farm, about the land he had loved and worked for so many decades. He thought about what would happen to it after he was gone. It would be sold, probably, divided up and developed, turned into something that had nothing to do with farming or community, or the values that had made Pelican Town special. The thought broke his heart. But then he thought about you, his grandchild, working in the city, trapped in a corporate job that was slowly killing your spirit. And he had an idea. He wrote you a letter. He told you about the farm, about the valley, about the life he had built there. He told you about how the city can consume you if you let it, how easy it is to forget what matters when you're caught up in the pursuit of success and money and status. And he told you that if you ever reached a point where you couldn't take it anymore, where the corporate life became unbearable, the farm was yours. You could come to Pelican Town, start over, build something real. It wouldn't be easy. The farm was overgrown, the community was struggling, the valley had lost its magic. But it was possible. It was still possible to make a life there, to be part of something meaningful, to help the town remember what it had been. Your grandfather sealed that letter with hope. Hope that you would never need it, that you would find happiness and fulfillment in the city, but also hope that if you did need it, if you did reach that breaking point, you would have the courage to leave, to start over, to take the chance he was offering you. He left instructions for the letter to be delivered when you needed it most, when the weight of your corporate existence became too much to bear. And then he died, peacefully, on his farm, surrounded by the land he loved, trusting that somehow, some way, his legacy would continue. Let your mind grow quiet now, thoughts fading like stars at dawn, still present but invisible, distant and unimportant. The farm sat empty for a while after your grandfather's death. The lawyer who handled his estate tried to contact you, but you were busy with work, with deadlines, with the endless demands of corporate life. The letters sat unopened on your desk, just another piece of mail in a pile of things you didn't have time to deal with. The farm waited, patient, the land slowly reclaiming what your grandfather had built. Weeds grew tall in the fields. Trees sprouted where crops had once grown. The cabin remained standing, solid and weatherproof, but empty, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. And then one day, you reached your breaking point. Maybe it was a particularly bad day at work, or maybe it was the accumulation of thousands of bad days finally becoming too much. You opened your grandfather's letter, read his words, looked at the deed to the farm, and you made a decision that would change everything. You quit your job at Joja Corporation, packed what little you owned and took a bus to Stardew Valley. You arrived in spring, when everything was beginning again, when the world was waking up from winter. The farm was overgrown, the cabin was dusty, and you had no idea what you were doing. But you were there. You were free, and for the first time in years, you could breathe. The people of Pelican Town didn't know what to make of you at first. A city person, coming to take over the old farm, probably thinking farming was easy, probably planning to give up and leave within a few months. They'd seen it before. People from the city buying rural property, romanticising the simple life, then discovering that farming is hard work and leaving as soon as the reality set in. So they were polite but distant, friendly but not welcoming, waiting to see if you would stick around or if you were just another temporary presence in their declining town. Mayor Lewis greeted you officially, gave you the tour of town, introduced you to a few people. He was kind but tired, an old man who had been watching his town die for decades and didn't have the energy to hope anymore. He told you about Pelican Town's history, about how it used to be a thriving community, about how things had changed. He didn't say it directly, but you could hear the resignation in his voice, the acceptance that Pelican Town's best days were behind it, that the decline was irreversible, that the town would eventually fade away entirely. Robin, the carpenter, was more optimistic. She came to your farm to introduce herself, to offer her services if you needed any buildings constructed or upgraded. She was practical and straightforward, a woman who solved problems with her hands and her tools. Robin had lived in Pelican Town her whole life, had watched it change, but she hadn't given up on it. She still believed the town could recover, that new people bringing new energy could make a difference. She looked at your overgrown farm and saw potential, saw what it could become with work and care. She encouraged you, told you that your grandfather had been a good man and a good farmer, that the land was still good even if it looked rough now. Pierre was cautiously hopeful when you visited his store. Another person in town meant another potential customer, someone who might shop locally instead of at Jojamart. He was friendly, eager to help, offering advice about what crops to plant and when. But there was desperation underneath his friendliness, a sense that he was fighting a losing battle against Joja and knew it. Every sale mattered to Pierre. Every customer who chose his store over Jojamart was a small victory in a war he was slowly losing. He wanted you to succeed, wanted your farm to thrive, because your success would be his success, would be the town's success. The other residents were more reserved. They'd been hurt too many times by people leaving, by promises that weren't kept, by hope that turned out to be false. So they watched you from a distance, polite but uncommitted, waiting to see what you would do. Would you work the farm seriously, or would you give up after the first hard season? Would you participate in the community, or would you keep to yourself? Would you shop at Pierre's, or would you take the easy route and shop at Jojamart? Would you be part of Pelican Town's potential recovery, or would you be just another person passing through? You started working the farm, and it was harder than you expected. Your body wasn't used to physical labour, wasn't prepared for the demands of farming. Your hands blistered from the hoe and the watering can. Your back ached from bending over to plant seeds and harvest crops. Your muscles screamed from clearing debris and chopping wood. Every day was exhausting. Every night you fell into bed completely spent. But there was something satisfying about the work, something real and tangible that your corporate job had never provided. You could see the results of your labour, cleared fields, planted crops, a slowly improving farm. It wasn't much, but it was yours, and it mattered. The first time you harvested crops and sold them, you felt a sense of accomplishment that surprised you. These were parsnips you had planted, watered, tended. These were green beans you had grown from seeds. This was money you had earned through your own work, your own effort, your own connection to the land. It wasn't a lot of money. Farming is not a path to wealth, but it was honest money, clean money, money that represented something real rather than just numbers in a corporate account. Let your breathing become automatic now, effortless, something that happens without thought or attention. As you worked your farm, as you became part of the daily rhythm of Pelican Town, you started to learn the stories of the people who lived there. Every person carried their own history, their own struggles, their own reasons for staying in a town that seemed to be dying. Some were born there and never left, tied to the land and the community by bonds too strong to break. Others had come from elsewhere, seeking something they couldn't find in the city, finding in Pelican Town's quiet decline a kind of peace that prosperity could never provide. Each person was part of the town's story, part of its history, part of what made it more than just a collection of buildings in a valley. Lewis, the mayor, had been leading Pelican Town for decades, watching it slowly decline under his leadership. He was a good man, well-meaning and kind, but he lacked the vision and courage to make the hard decisions that might have saved the town. He maintained the status quo, kept things running as best he could, but he never pushed for real change, never challenged Joya Corporation's influence, never rallied the community to fight for their future. Lewis was having a secret relationship with Marnie the rancher, but he refused to make it public because he worried about his reputation, about what people would think. It was a small cowardice, but it represented a larger pattern. Lewis always chose the safe path, the easy path, even when the harder path might have led somewhere better. Marnie ran the ranch south of your farm, selling animals and supplies to the few farmers who remained. She was kind and patient, always willing to help, always ready with advice about animal care. But there was a sadness to her, a loneliness that came from loving someone who wouldn't fully commit to her. She'd been waiting for Lewis to make their relationship public for years, hoping he would eventually find the courage to choose her openly. But he never did, and Marnie was slowly realizing that waiting for someone to change is often just another way of wasting your life. She loved her animals, found purpose in caring for them, but she deserved more than secret meetings and hidden affection. Shane was Marnie's nephew, working at Jojamart and drinking himself to death. When you first met him, he was hostile and dismissive, clearly dealing with something he wouldn't talk about. Shane was deeply depressed, struggling with alcoholism, convinced that his life didn't matter. He worked a job he hated, lived with his aunt, and took care of his goddaughter Jazz because her parents had died and someone had to. Shane's story was one of quiet desperation, of a man who had given up on himself but kept going because other people depended on him. He drank to numb the pain, to make the days bearable, to forget for a few hours that he was trapped in a life he never wanted. Jazz was Shane's goddaughter, a young girl who had lost her parents and now lived with Marnie and Shane. She was innocent and sweet, playing with her friend Vincent, unaware of how much Shane was struggling. Jazz loved Shane, looked up to him, and that love was part of what kept him alive. He couldn't leave her. She needed him. So he stayed, and he fought, even when fighting felt impossible. Jazz represented hope in Pelican Town, the possibility that the next generation might have a better life than the current one, that the town's decline might be reversed before it was too late. Pam was the bus driver, though the bus hadn't run in years because the road was broken. She was an alcoholic, spending most of her time at the Stardrop Saloon, drinking away her pain and her paycheck. Pam was rough around the edges, defensive, quick to anger. But underneath that was a woman who'd been beaten down by life, who had made mistakes she couldn't take back, who was trying to survive the only way she knew how. Pam had lost her purpose when the bus stopped running, lost her identity as someone who contributed to the community. Without that role, she didn't know who she was anymore, so she drank and tried not to think about it too much. Penny was Pam's daughter, a gentle young woman who tutored Jas and Vincent in the library because the town didn't have a school. She was kind and patient, dreaming of a better life but trapped by her circumstances. Penny lived in a trailer with her mother, and she was ashamed of it, ashamed of the poverty, ashamed of Pam's drinking. She read books to escape, imagining worlds where she wasn't stuck in a trailer with a mother who couldn't take care of herself. Penny wanted to be a good teacher, wanted to give Jas and Vincent the education and attention they deserved. But she also dreamed of leaving, of going somewhere she wasn't defined by her mother's reputation, where she could be her own person. Sam was Penny's friend, a young man who worked at Joja Mart and dreamed of being a musician. He was optimistic and energetic, the kind of person who lit up a room. Sam played guitar, wrote songs and performed with his band, him, Sebastian and Abigail. They weren't famous, not even particularly good, but they loved it, and that was enough. Sam's music was his escape, his way of expressing feelings he couldn't put into words. He lived with his mother Jodie, his younger brother Vincent, and his father Kent when Kent returned from war. Sam was the oldest, and he felt responsible for keeping everyone happy, for being the positive one, for making sure his family didn't fall apart. Jodie was Sam and Vincent's mother, a housewife who had been holding the family together while her husband was at war. She was tired, overwhelmed, feeling trapped by her role. Jodie loved her family, but she had lost herself in taking care of them. She didn't know who she was anymore outside of being a mother and wife. When Kent returned, she was relieved but also anxious, worried about how he had changed, about whether their marriage could survive what he'd been through. Jodie's story was about the invisible labour of holding a family together, about the cost of always putting others first, about the slow erosion of self that happens when you never prioritise your own needs. Kent was a war veteran who returned to Pelican Town in the second year. He was quiet, haunted, clearly suffering from PTSD. Kent had nightmares, panic attacks triggered by loud noises. He struggled to readjust to civilian life, to be the husband and father his family needed. Kent didn't talk about what he saw in the war, but it was written in every tense moment, every flinch at unexpected sounds. He was trying to be normal, to fit back into his old life, but everything felt wrong. The town was too quiet. His family was too fragile. He was too broken. Kent was doing his best, but his best wasn't what it used to be, and he didn't know if it ever would be again. Let your thoughts drift now, like leaves on a gentle stream, present but moving, here but going, requiring no effort or attention. Sebastian was Sam's best friend and bandmate, a programmer who worked from home and rarely left his basement room. He was introverted and moody, feeling trapped in Pelican Town, dreaming of moving to the city. Sebastian lived with his mother Robin, his stepfather Demetrius, and his half-sister Maru. He felt like an outsider in his own family, like he didn't quite fit, like he was tolerated rather than loved. Sebastian's relationship with Demetrius was strained. Demetrius was a scientist, logical and precise, and he didn't understand Sebastian's artistic nature, his need for solitude, his depression. Demetrius favoured Maru, his biological daughter, and Sebastian felt that favouritism keenly. He wasn't angry about it, just resigned, accepting that he would always be second in his stepfather's eyes. Robin was Sebastian's mother, a carpenter who ran her own business. She loved Sebastian, but she was busy, distracted, trying to balance her work and her family. Robin didn't realise how isolated Sebastian felt, how much he was struggling. She thought he was just going through a phase, that he would grow out of his moodiness. But Sebastian's pain was real, and it had been real for years. He rode his motorcycle at night, racing through the valley, feeling free for a few moments. The motorcycle was his escape, his way of pretending he wasn't trapped. He talked about leaving, about moving to the city, about starting over somewhere no one knew him. But he never did. He stayed in Pelican Town in his basement, coding and smoking and dreaming of a life he was too afraid to pursue. Mary was Sebastian's half-sister, a brilliant young woman studying to be a nurse, while also inventing gadgets in her spare time. She was optimistic and driven, everything Sebastian wasn't. Maru was close with her father Demetrius, sharing his love of science and logic. She didn't understand why Sebastian was so moody, why he couldn't just be happy. The tension between them was unspoken but present, a gap neither knew how to bridge. Maru worked at the clinic with Harvey, learning medicine, preparing for a future beyond Pelican Town. She was one of the few young people in town who wasn't desperate to leave, who saw potential in staying, in building something there. Demetrius was Maru's father and Robin's husband, a scientist who studied the local ecosystem. He was logical to a fault, often missing the emotional subtext of situations. Demetrius loved his family, but he showed it through facts and data rather than affection. He didn't understand Sebastian, didn't know how to connect with a stepson who was so different from him. The distance between them grew year by year and neither knew how to close it. Demetrius meant well, but good intentions without understanding often cause more harm than deliberate cruelty. Abigail was the third member of Sam and Sebastian's band, a young woman with purple hair who loved adventure and the occult. She was Pierre and Caroline's daughter, though there were hints that Pierre might not be her biological father. Abigail's purple hair never faded, never needed to be dyed, and she had an affinity for magic that suggested something unusual about her heritage. She felt trapped in Pelican Town, stuck working at her father's store, expected to be a good daughter when all she wanted was adventure. She practiced sword fighting in secret, played video games, explored the mines when she could sneak away. Abigail was brave and reckless, the kind of person who ran toward danger rather than away from it. Pierre was Abigail's father, or the man who raised her, running the general store in competition with Jojamart. He was proud and stubborn, refusing to give up even as Yoja undercut his prices and stole his customers. Pierre loved his family, but he was obsessed with his business, with proving that he could succeed, with being better than Joja. That obsession strained his relationships, made him distant, made him miss what was happening in his own home. Pierre's fight against Joja was admirable in some ways, but it consumed him, left him with little energy for the people who actually mattered. Caroline was Pierre's wife and Abigail's mother, a woman with secrets she kept close. She tended a garden behind their house, growing tea leaves and flowers, finding peace in the quiet work. Caroline had been unhappy in her marriage once, feeling trapped and alone. She'd visited the wizard's tower, seeking something: advice, magic, companionship. What happened there were never fully explained, but 9 months later, Abigail was born with purple hair that never faded. Caroline never told Pierre about her visits to the wizard. She never confirmed or denied that Abigail was his daughter. She just tended her garden, kept her secrets, and tried to hold her family together. Hayley was a young woman obsessed with fashion and photography, initially coming across as shallow and rude. She was dismissive at first, clearly judging you for being a farmer, for choosing a simple life over the glamorous city existence she valued. But Hayley's rudeness was armour, protection against a world that judged her for being pretty and interested in superficial things. People assumed she was dumb, assumed she had no depth, and Hayley had learned to meet those expectations rather than fight them. But she was more than her appearance, more than her interest in clothes and makeup. Hayley was creative, taking beautiful photographs, capturing moments that mattered. She was loyal to her sister Emily, protective and caring even when she didn't show it. Emily was Hayley's older sister, a free spirit who worked at the Stardrop Saloon and made her own clothes. She was into crystals, meditation, and spiritual practices, believing in energy and vibrations and the interconnectedness of all things. Emily was kind to everyone, seeing the good in people, offering encouragement and support. She had dreams, vivid and strange, that she believed were messages from the universe. She talked about them openly, not caring if people thought she was weird. Emily was comfortable being herself, unapologetically spiritual in a town that didn't always understand her. She made clothes from recycled materials, danced in her room, and found joy in small things. Let your body become weightless now, floating in darkness, held by nothing, needing nothing, simply existing in perfect peace. Harvey was the town doctor, a kind and somewhat anxious man who ran the clinic. He was dedicated to his work, always available when someone needed medical care, but he was lonely. Harvey had moved to Pelican Town years ago, drawn by the idea of being a small-town doctor, of making a real difference in people's lives. But the reality was harder than he expected. The town was declining. People couldn't always afford medical care, and he spent a lot of time alone in his clinic waiting for patients who didn't come. Harvey loved planes and flying, dreamed of being a pilot, but he had chosen medicine instead because it seemed more practical, more responsible. He sometimes wondered if he'd made the right choice, if following the practical path had cost him the life he really wanted. Elliot was a writer who lived in a cabin on the beach, working on his novel and dreaming of a literary success. He was romantic and dramatic, speaking in flowery language that some people found charming and others found pretentious. Elliot had left the city to focus on his writing, believing that the quiet isolation of Pelican Town would help him create his masterpiece. He spent his days writing, his evenings at the saloon, and his nights reading by candlelight. Elliot was talented but undisciplined, full of grand ideas but struggling with the actual work of finishing a novel. He represented a certain kind of dreamer, someone who talks about their art more than they create it, who's more in love with the idea of being a writer than with the hard work of writing. Leah was an artist who lived in a cottage in the forest, creating sculptures from wood and stone. She had left the city and a toxic relationship to start over in Pelican Town, seeking peace and creative freedom. Leah was independent and strong, comfortable with solitude, finding inspiration in nature. She foraged in the forest, collected materials for her art, and created beautiful pieces that few people saw because Pelican Town didn't have an art scene. Leah's story was about choosing authenticity over success, about valuing creative freedom over financial security, about building a life that felt right, even if it didn't look impressive from the outside. Alex was a young man who lived with his grandparents, Evelyn and George. dreaming of becoming a professional gridball player. He was athletic and confident, spending his days working out and practicing, convinced that he would make it to the professional leagues. But Alex was also insecure, using his bravado to hide his fear that he wasn't good enough, that his dreams were unrealistic, that he would end up stuck in Pelican Town like everyone else. His mother had died when he was young, and his father was an alcoholic who had abandoned him. Alex's grandparents had raised him, given him stability and love, but they were old now, and Alex worried about what would happen when they were gone. Evelyn was Alex's grandmother, a sweet elderly woman who baked cookies and tended her garden. She was kind to everyone, always ready with a warm smile and a word of encouragement. Evelyn had lived in Pelican Town her entire life, had watched it grow and thrive and decline. She remembered the golden years, when the community centre was alive with activity, when the town felt like a real community. She missed those days, but she didn't dwell on the past. Evelyn focused on the present, on being kind to her neighbours, on making her small corner of the world a little bit brighter. George was Evelyn's husband and Alex's grandfather, a grumpy old man in a wheelchair. He was bitter about his disability, frustrated by his limitations, often rude to people who tried to help him. But underneath the grumpiness was a man who had worked hard his whole life, who had built a good life for his family, who was struggling with the loss of independence that came with age and injury. George loved his wife and grandson, even if he didn't always show it well. He was part of Pelican Town's history, one of the old-timers who remembered when things were different, when the town had a future. Gus was the owner and bartender of the Stardrop Saloon, a friendly man who knew everyone in town. The saloon was one of the few places in Pelican Town that still felt alive, still served as a gathering place for the community. Gus kept it running through the town's decline, providing a space where people could come together, share their troubles, find comfort in companionship. He was a good listener, a kind presence, someone who made everyone feel welcome. Gus represented the best of what Pelican Town had been, a place where people took care of each other, where community mattered more than profit. Clint was the blacksmith, a lonely man who ran his shop and pined for Emily. He was skilled at his work, able to upgrade tools and process ore, but he was socially awkward, unable to express his feelings, trapped by his own insecurity. Clint had lived in Pelican Town his whole life, had watched the town decline, had seen most of his friends leave. He stayed because the town needed a blacksmith, because his father had run the shop before him, because leaving felt like giving up. But staying meant being alone, meant watching the woman he loved from a distance, meant accepting a life that felt incomplete. Willie was a fisherman who lived in a shack on the beach, spending his days on the water. He was weathered and wise, a man who had lived a full life and found contentment in simple things. Willie loved the ocean, loved fishing, loved the rhythm of tides and seasons. He had seen Pelican Town change over the decades, had watched the fishing industry decline as pollution and overfishing depleted the waters. But he kept fishing, kept maintaining his boat, kept living the life he had always lived. Willie represented a kind of stubborn persistence, a refusal to change even when change might be necessary, a commitment to a way of life that was slowly disappearing. Linus was a homeless man who lived in a tent in the mountains, choosing to live outside of society. He was kind and gentle, content with his simple life, finding happiness in nature and solitude. The townspeople didn't understand Linus, didn't understand why someone would choose to live in a tent when they could have a house. Some people were kind to him, but others were cruel, vandalizing his tent, throwing rocks at him, treating him like he was less than human because he lived differently. Linus's story was about the cost of non-conformity, about how society punishes people who reject its values, about finding peace despite being rejected by the community around you. The wizard lived in a tower at the western edge of the forest, isolated from the town. His real name was Magnus Rasmodius, though most people just called him the wizard. He'd been in the valley for decades, studying magic, brewing potions, watching over the mystical elements that most townspeople didn't even know existed. The wizard had been married once to a woman he loved deeply, but something went wrong. His wife became jealous, paranoid, convinced that the wizard was unfaithful. The jealousy consumed her, twisted her, transformed her into the witch who lived in the swamp. The wizard still loved her, even now, but some transformations couldn't be undone. He had a daughter in the town, born from his marriage, but he wouldn't say who she was, protecting her from the complications of having a magical father. Let your mind grow empty now, thoughts dissolving like mist in morning sun, leaving only warmth and peace and the gentle pull towards sleep. As you learned these stories, as you became part of the daily life of Pelican Town, you started to understand what your grandfather had meant in his letter. This wasn't just a town that was dying. This was a community full of people who were struggling, who were carrying pain and loss and disappointment, but who were still here, still trying, still hoping that things might get better. They'd been beaten down by economic decline, by the loss of young people, by Joja Corporation's influence, by the slow erosion of everything that had made Pelican Town special. But they hadn't given up entirely. They were still here, still maintaining the traditions even in diminished form, still showing up for each other in small ways, and you realized that you could help. Not by yourself. One person couldn't save a town, couldn't reverse decades of decline through individual effort alone. But you could be part of something larger. You could work your farm, contribute to the local economy, participate in the community. You could shop at Pierre's instead of Joja Mart, supporting local business even when it cost more. You could attend the festivals, participate in the traditions, help them feel meaningful again. You could befriend your neighbours, learn their stories, show them that someone cared. Small actions, individual choices, but they added up. They mattered. The first festival you attended was the Egg Festival in spring. It was a modest affair, nothing like the grand celebrations your grandfather had described from the town's golden years. But people showed up, dressed in their best clothes, trying to make it special. The children hunted for eggs, the adults socialized, and for a few hours, Pelican Town felt like a community again. You participated in the egg hunt, talked to your neighbours, bought some strawberry seeds from Pierre. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. As spring turned to summer, as you continued working your farm and becoming part of the community, you started to notice something strange. The old community centre, the ruined building that everyone had written off as beyond saving, seemed to be watching you. You would walk past it and feel a pull, a sense that something inside wanted your attention. Most people avoided the community centre, uncomfortable with its decay, preferring to pretend it didn't exist rather than confront what its ruin represented. But you were curious, and one day you decided to investigate. The inside of the community centre was worse than you expected. The beautiful craftsmanship your grandfather had described was still visible, but it was buried under years of neglect. Dust covered everything. The windows were broken, letting in rain and wind. The floors were littered with debris. The walls were stained and damaged. It was heartbreaking to see what this building had been reduced to imagine what it had once been, and compare it to what it was now. You walked through the rooms, each one telling a story of abandonment, of a community that had stopped gathering, stopped connecting, stopped caring. And then you saw them, small colourful creatures, apple-shaped, watching you from the shadows, the Junimos, the forest spirits your grandfather had mentioned in his stories, the beings who had blessed the community centre and the valley. They had been hiding here all along, waiting in the ruins of the building they had once blessed, hoping that someone would come who could help them restore what had been lost. The Junimos communicated through symbols and gestures, speaking a language you didn't understand but somehow felt. They showed you their vision for the community centre, showed you what it could become again if you helped them. They needed bundles of items, crops, fish, foraged goods, artisan products. Each bundle represented something the valley had lost, something that needed to be remembered and restored. If you brought them these bundles, they would repair the community centre, would bring it back to life, would restore their blessing to the valley. It was an enormous task. The bundles required items from every season, items that would take years to collect. You would need to master farming, fishing, foraging and artisan production. You would need to explore every corner of the valley, from the beach to the mountains to the desert. You would need to dedicate yourself completely to this restoration project, putting in countless hours of work with no guarantee of success. It would be easier to ignore the Junimos, to let the community centre remain a ruin, to accept that some things were too broken to fix. But you thought about your grandfather, about the letter he had written, about the hope he had placed in you. You thought about the people of Pelican Town, about their quiet struggles and their persistent hope. You thought about what this valley had been and what it could be again, and you decided to try. You decided to help the Junimos, to work toward restoring the community centre, to be part of bringing the magic back to Pelican Town. Let your breathing become so slow, so quiet, barely disturbing the air around you, each breath taking you deeper into rest. The work of restoring the community centre became the organising principle of your life in Pelican Town. Every decision you made, every crop you planted, every fish you caught, every item you foraged was considered in terms of whether it might be needed for a bundle. You planned your farm layout to maximise efficiency, to ensure you could grow all the crops the Junimos needed. You learned to fish in different locations and different weather, seeking the specific fish required for the aquarium bundles. You explored the forest and the mountains, learning which items grew where and when, collecting the foraged goods needed for the foraging bundles. The townspeople noticed your dedication to the community centre, and their reactions were mixed. Some were hopeful, excited by the possibility that the building might be restored, that the heart of their community might beat again. Others were sceptical, convinced that the community centre was too far gone, that your efforts were wasted, that you would eventually give up like everyone else who had tried to save Pelican Town. A few were actively hostile, particularly those who worked for Joja Corporation, or who had accepted the town's decline as inevitable, and didn't want to be reminded that things could be different. Morris, the manager of Joja Mart, was particularly opposed to your community centre restoration project. He saw it as a threat to Joja's influence in the valley, a rejection of the corporate convenience his store represented. Morris tried to convince you to abandon the community centre and instead purchase a Joja membership, promising that Joja could restore the building faster and more efficiently than the Junimos ever could. He offered you shortcuts, easy solutions, the promise of progress without the hard work. But his offers felt hollow, transactional, lacking the meaning and connection that came from working with the Junimos in the community. You continued your work season after season, slowly completing bundles and watching as the Junimos repaired sections of the community centre. The pantry was restored first, its shelves stocked with preserved goods, its purpose as a community food storage renewed. Then the crafts room, filled with artisan equipment and supplies. Then the fish tank transformed into a beautiful aquarium showcasing the valley's aquatic life. Then the boiler room, its heating system repaired, ready to warm the building during winter gatherings. Then the bulletin board, restored as a place for community announcements and connection. And finally the vault, its safe filled with the gold needed to complete the restoration. Each completed bundle, each repaired room felt like a small victory, but more than that, it felt like a conversation with the valley's history, with people who had built Pelican Town, with your grandfather and his generation who had known the community centre in its glory days. You were honouring their work, continuing their legacy, proving that what they had built mattered enough to save. The Junimos worked at night, their magic weaving through the building, fixing what time and neglect had destroyed. And slowly, room by room, the community centre came back to life. The townspeople began to notice the changes. They would walk past the community centre and see that the windows had been repaired, that the floors had been cleaned, that the building was starting to look like something other than a ruin. Some of them ventured inside, curious, amazed by the transformation. They remembered the community centre as it had been, remembered gatherings and celebrations and the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. And they started to hope that maybe, just maybe, those days could return. As you worked on the community centre, you also worked on your relationships with the townspeople. You talked to them every day, learned their stories, showed them that you cared about them as people rather than just as neighbours or customers. You gave them gifts, items you knew they would appreciate, showing that you paid attention to their preferences and interests. You helped them with their problems when you could, offering support and assistance without expecting anything in return. Slowly, gradually, the people of Pelican Town began to trust you, to see you not as a temporary presence, but as a permanent part of their community. You befriended Shane, showing up consistently even when he was hostile, refusing to give up on him. You listened when he talked about his struggles, offered support without judgment, reminded him that his life mattered. Shane started to open up, started to let you see the person underneath the depression and alcoholism. He began raising blue chickens, finding purpose in caring for something other than himself. He started therapy, started trying to get better. Shane's recovery wasn't linear or perfect, but he was trying, and that was what mattered. You had helped him see that he was worth fighting for, that his life had value, that he didn't have to face his demons alone. You befriended Penny, showing her that she was more than her circumstances, more than her mother's reputation. You encouraged her teaching, supported her dreams, treated her with the respect she deserved. Penny started to believe that she could have a better life, that she wasn't trapped forever in that trailer, that someone saw her for who she really was. When you eventually helped fund the construction of a new house for Pam and Penny through the community upgrade project, Penny cried, overwhelmed by the kindness, by the fact that someone cared enough to give her family a real home. You befriended Sebastian, respecting his need for solitude while also showing him that he wasn't as alone as he thought. You understood his desire to leave Pelican Town, his feeling of being trapped, his complicated relationship with his family. But you also showed him that the valley had value, that the community was worth being part of, that staying didn't have to mean giving up on his dreams. Sebastian started to open up, started to let you into his world, started to see Pelican Town as something other than a prison. Let your whole body relax completely now, every muscle loose and heavy, every tension released, every worry dissolved. You befriended Hayley, seeing past her defensive rudeness to the creative, loyal person underneath. You showed her that there was value in the simple life, that farming and community mattered as much as fashion and fame. Hayley's character development was remarkable. She went from dismissive and rude to warm and genuine, learning that she had been wrong about you, about the valley, about what makes a life meaningful. She started taking photographs of the valley, capturing its beauty, seeing it with new eyes. You befriended Emily, appreciating her spiritual nature, her kindness, her authenticity. You participated in her strange dreams, supported her creative projects, showed her that being different was something to celebrate rather than hide. Emily was one of the few people in Pelican Town who seemed genuinely happy, who had found peace with who she was, and her joy was contagious. She reminded everyone that there were many ways to live a meaningful life, that conventional success wasn't the only path to fulfillment. You befriended Elliot, encouraging his writing, believing in his talent even when he doubted himself. You helped him see that finishing his novel was more important than talking about finishing it, that discipline mattered as much as inspiration. Elliot eventually completed his book, held a reading at the library, and took the first real step toward his dream of being a published author. Your belief in him had helped him believe in himself. You befriended Leah, appreciating her art, understanding her choice to prioritize creative freedom over financial security. You supported her work, attended her art show, showed her that her sculptures mattered even if they didn't sell for much money. Leah had left a toxic relationship to start over in Pelican Town, and your friendship helped her see that she'd made the right choice, that building an authentic life was worth more than building an impressive one. You befriended Alex, seeing past his bravado to the insecure young man underneath. You encouraged his gridball dreams while also helping him understand that his worth wasn't dependent on athletic success, that he had value as a person, regardless of whether he made it to the professional leagues. Alex started to open up about his mother's death, his father's abandonment, his fear of not being good enough. Your friendship helped him see that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that admitting fear was the first step toward overcoming it. You befriended the older residents, Evelyn, George, Gus and Willie, the wizard and Linus. You showed them respect, listened to their stories, valued their wisdom and experience. They had watched Pelican Town decline for decades, had seen so many people give up and leave, had almost lost hope that things could get better. But your presence, your dedication to the community centre, your genuine care for the community, started to rekindle that hope. Maybe the town's best days weren't behind it. Maybe there was still a future worth building. The festivals became more meaningful as you participated in them year after year. The Egg Festival in spring, the Flower Dance, the Luau in summer, the Dance of the Moonlight Jellies, the Stardew Valley Fair in fall, the Spirits' Eve Festival, the Festival of Ice in winter, the Feast of the Winter Star. Each one was a chance for the community to come together, to remember what it felt like to be connected, to celebrate the valley and each other. The festivals weren't as grand as they had been in the town's golden years, but they were growing, improving, becoming more joyful as the community's spirit was restored. You repaired the bus, funding the construction work needed to clear the landslide and fix the road. Pam got her job back, got her purpose back, got a reason to stay sober during the day. The bus connected Pelican Town to the desert, to Calico Desert and the Oasis Shop, expanding the valley's world, reminding everyone that they weren't completely isolated. Pam was grateful, more grateful than she could express, and she took her job seriously, showing up on time, driving safely, taking pride in her work again. You unlock the railroad, clearing the path and discovering the spa and the witch's swamp. The railroad didn't run anymore. The trains had stopped coming years ago, but the area itself was beautiful, peaceful, a reminder of when Pelican Town had been connected to the larger world. The spa became a place where townspeople could relax, could soak in the hot springs and let their troubles melt away. It was another piece of the valley's infrastructure restored, another amenity that improved everyone's quality of life. You explored the mines, descending level by level, fighting monsters and collecting ore and gems. The mines were dangerous, but they were also valuable, a source of resources that could be used to upgrade tools and buildings. You reached the bottom at level 120, found the Skull Key, and unlocked access to the Skull Cavern in the desert. The Skull Cavern was even more dangerous, an endless descent into darkness, but it contained iridium and other rare materials. You pushed yourself, descended as far as you could, brought back resources that helped you improve your farm and contribute to the community. You met the dwarf in the mines and Krobus in the sewers, learned about the ancient war between their peoples, helped them find peace with each other. Two survivors of a conflict that had happened long before humans came to the valley, choosing to let go of old hatred, choosing peace over continued enmity. It was a small moment, easily missed, but it represented something profound, the possibility of healing even the oldest wounds, of choosing connection over division, of building a better future by refusing to be defined by the past. Let your thoughts become like clouds, drifting across the sky of your mind, present but insubstantial, here but not demanding attention. And then, finally, after years of work, after countless hours of farming and fishing and foraging and mining, after building relationships and participating in festivals and contributing to the community, you completed the final bundle. You brought the last items to the community centre, placed them in the Junimo bundle, and watched as the forest spirits accepted your offering. The building glowed with magic, with renewed energy, with the blessing that had been absent for so long. The Junimos danced and celebrated, their joy palpable, their gratitude overwhelming. They had been waiting for someone like you, someone who cared enough to do the work, to restore what had been broken, to help them bring the magic back to the valley. The next day, the entire town gathered at the community centre for a celebration. The building was fully restored, more beautiful than it had been even in its glory days. The Junimos had worked their magic, repairing not just the physical structure, but infusing it with their blessing, ensuring that as long as the community remained strong, the valley would thrive. The townspeople walked through the rooms, amazed by the transformation, remembering what the community centre had meant to them, understanding what its restoration represented. Mayor Lewis gave a speech, thanking you for what you had done, acknowledging that you had accomplished what everyone else had thought impossible. He talked about how the community centre had been the heart of Pelican Town, how its decline had mirrored the town's decline, how its restoration represented hope for the future. He was emotional, this old man who'd watched his town die for decades, finally seeing a reason to believe that things could get better. The townspeople thanked you individually, each person expressing their gratitude in their own way. Pierre thanked you for shopping locally, for supporting his store, for helping him compete with Joja. Robin thanked you for believing in the community, for putting in the work to restore what had been lost. Marnie thanked you for being a good neighbour, for caring about the people of Pelican Town. Shane thanked you for not giving up on him, for showing him that his life mattered. Penny thanked you for giving her hope, for showing her that she could have a better life. Sebastian thanked you for understanding him, for respecting his need for solitude while also showing him the value of community. Each thank you was personal, specific, reflecting the individual relationships you had built. You hadn't just restored a building, you had restored a community, had helped people remember what it felt like to be connected, to work together toward a common goal, to be part of something larger than themselves. The community centre was beautiful, but what really mattered was what it represented. The possibility of renewal, the power of dedication and care, the truth that broken things could be fixed if someone was willing to do the work. The Junimos appeared one last time, visible to everyone now, not just to you. The townspeople gasped, amazed by these small, colourful creatures, these forest spirits who had blessed their valley for generations. The Junimos danced and celebrated, then slowly faded back into the forest, their work complete. They had restored the community centre, had renewed their blessing, had given Pelican Town another chance. Now it was up to the people to maintain what had been restored, to keep the community strong, to ensure that the magic didn't fade again. And something changed in Pelican Town after that day. The change was subtle at first, but it grew over time. People started gathering at the community centre again, using it for meetings and classes and celebrations. The festivals became more joyful, more well-attended, more meaningful. New people started moving to the valley, drawn by stories of a community that had been restored, a town that was thriving again. Young people who had left started coming back, seeing opportunities in Pelican Town that hadn't existed before. Farms that had been abandoned were purchased and restored. Businesses that had been struggling started to thrive. Pierre's general store saw increasing sales as more people chose to shop locally, as the community's renewed spirit made supporting local business feel important again. The Stardrop Saloon was full of laughter every night, people gathering to share their days, to connect with their neighbours, to be part of the community. The clinic was busier as the growing population needed more medical care. The blacksmith shop had more customers as more farms needed tools and equipment. Every business, every aspect of Pelican Town's economy benefited from the community's restoration. Joja Mart struggled as people stopped shopping there, as the convenience and low prices became less appealing than supporting local business and maintaining community connections. Morris tried various promotions and sales, but he couldn't compete with the renewed sense of community, with people's desire to be part of something meaningful, rather than just consumers in a corporate system. Eventually, Joja Mart closed, the building abandoned, a monument to the corporation's failed attempt to consume Pelican Town. The townspeople didn't celebrate the closure. Many had worked there, had depended on those jobs, but they recognized it as a turning point, a sign that the community had chosen its own path rather than accepting corporate control. The land where Joja Mart had stood was eventually purchased by the community and transformed into a movie theatre, a place where townspeople could gather for entertainment and connection. The theatre became another gathering place, another thread in the fabric of community that was being rewoven. Children went to movies with their friends, couples went on dates, families spent evenings together watching films and eating popcorn. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It was another way for people to connect, another reason to come together, Another piece of what made Pelican Town feel like home. Let your breathing become so gentle, so effortless, like a whisper of wind through grass, barely there but constant. Your farm thrived as the valley's magic returned. The crops grew more abundantly, the animals were healthier and more productive. The land responded to your care with generosity. You expanded your farm, added new buildings, raised more animals, planted more crops. You created artisan goods, wine and cheese and cloth and oil, that sold for good money and contributed to the valley's economy. You became one of the most successful farmers in the region, not because you were trying to get rich, but because you loved the work, loved the land, loved being part of the community. You might have fallen in love during this time, might have married one of the townspeople and started a family. Maybe it was Shane, who had recovered from his depression and found purpose in raising his blue chickens. Maybe it was Sebastian, who had stopped dreaming of leaving and started appreciating what the valley offered. Maybe it was Haley, who had learned to see beauty in simple things. Maybe it was Emily, who had always seen the magic in the world and helped you see it too. Maybe it was Elliot, who had finished his novel and found success as a writer. Maybe it was Leah, who had built an authentic life and wanted to share it with someone. Maybe it was Penny, who had escaped the trailer and found happiness. Maybe it was Maru, who had decided to stay in Pelican Town and build her future there. Maybe it was Alex, who had learned that his worth wasn't dependent on athletic success. Maybe it was Abigail, who had found adventure in the valley's mines and mysteries. Whoever you chose, if you chose anyone, the relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine connection. You had taken the time to know them, to understand their struggles and dreams, to show them that you cared about them as people. The marriage wasn't a fairy tale ending where love solved all problems. It was a partnership, a commitment to building a life together, to supporting each other through difficulties, to creating something meaningful. You had children maybe, raised them on the farm, taught them about the land and the community, gave them the kind of childhood that was becoming rare in the modern world, connected to nature, part of a community, grounded in real work and real relationships. Or maybe you didn't marry anyone. Maybe you remained single, content with your farm and your friendships, finding fulfillment in the work and the community rather than in romantic partnership. That was valid too, was its own kind of happiness. Not everyone needs romantic love to have a meaningful life. Some people find their purpose in other ways, in work they care about, in communities they serve, in the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Either way, you had become a permanent part of Pelican Town, had woven yourself into its fabric so completely that it was hard to remember a time when you hadn't been there. The townspeople no longer saw you as the newcomer, the city person who had taken over the old farm. You were one of them now, a valued member of the community, someone who had proven through years of dedication and care that you belonged. Your farm was one of the landmarks of the valley, a place that people pointed to as an example of what was possible with hard work and love for the land. Your grandfather would have been proud. He had hoped that you would come to the valley, that you would take over the farm, that you would find the peace and purpose that had eluded you in the city. But he had hoped for even more than that. He had hoped that you would help restore the community, that you would be part of bringing the magic back to Pelican Town, that you would continue the work that his generation had started. And you had done that. You had exceeded his hopes, had accomplished what he had only dreamed of, had helped create a future for Pelican Town that was brighter than its past. The valley's history continued, but it was no longer a story of decline and loss. It was a story of renewal and hope, of a community that had been broken and had healed, of people who had been struggling and had found support, of a place that had lost its magic and had found it again. The community centre stood at the heart of the town, alive with activity, hosting gatherings and celebrations and meetings. The farms around the valley thrived, producing abundant crops and healthy animals. The businesses in town prospered, supported by a growing population and a strong local economy. The traditions continued, but they were joyful again, meaningful again, connecting people to each other and to their shared history. New stories were being written in Pelican Town, stories of children growing up in a thriving community, of young people choosing to stay rather than leave, of families building lives that mattered. The valley's future was uncertain. All futures are uncertain, but it was hopeful in a way it hadn't been for decades. The people of Pelican Town had remembered what they had forgotten, had reconnected with each other and with the land, had chosen community over convenience, had chosen meaning over money, had chosen to fight for their town rather than accept its decline, and you had been part of that. Not the only part. The restoration of Pelican Town was a collective effort, the result of many people making many small choices over many years. But you had been the catalyst, the person who had shown up when the town needed someone, who had done the work when everyone else had given up, who had believed in the community when belief seemed foolish. Your grandfather had given you the farm, but you had given the valley something more valuable: hope, dedication, proof that broken things could be fixed if someone cared enough to try. Let your body sink deeper into rest now, so heavy and relaxed that moving feels impossible, unnecessary, undesirable. The seasons continued their eternal cycle in the valley, each one bringing its own beauty and challenges. Spring arrived with its gentle rains and new growth, the world waking up from winter's sleep, everything green and fresh and full of possibility. You planted your crops, tended your animals, watched as the valley came alive again. The spring flowers bloomed, daffodils and tulips and blue jazz, covering the fields in colour. The birds returned from their winter migrations, filling the air with song. The river ran high with snowmelt from the mountains, its water cold and clear and full of fish. Summer brought warmth and long days, the sun rising early and setting late, giving you more time to work and explore. The crops grew tall and strong, the fruit trees heavy with developing fruit. The beach became a gathering place, townspeople coming to swim and relax, to enjoy the warm weather and the sound of waves. The ocean was full of life, fish and crabs and sea urchins all thriving in the clean water. The summer storms rolled in occasionally, dramatic and powerful, reminding everyone that nature was beautiful but also dangerous, that the valley's bounty came with respect for its power. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and changing colours, the world preparing for winter's rest. The harvest was abundant, the result of a full year's work, the reward for your dedication and care. The crops were gathered and stored, the animals prepared for the colder months ahead. The trees turned brilliant shades of red and orange and yellow, the forest becoming a tapestry of autumn colours. The fall festivals celebrated the harvest, gave thanks for the valley's generosity, acknowledged the hard work that had made the abundance possible. Winter brought cold and snow, the world going quiet and still, resting before the cycle began again. The farm work slowed during winter, giving you time to focus on other things: mining, fishing, building relationships, planning for the next year. The valley was beautiful in winter, covered in snow, peaceful and serene. The winter festivals brought warmth and light to the darkest time of year, reminded everyone that even in the cold and dark there was community, there was connection, there was reason to celebrate. Year after year, the seasons cycled, and the valley thrived. The magic that the Junimos had restored remained strong because the community remained strong, because people continued to gather and connect and support each other. The community centre hosted events throughout the year, was never empty for long, was always alive with purpose and activity. The traditions were maintained and evolved, new ones added as the community grew and changed, old ones adapted to fit new circumstances. Pelican Town was not frozen in the past, not trying to recreate exactly what had been. It was building something new, something that honoured its history while also embracing its future. The children who grew up in this restored Pelican Town would have different lives than their parents had. They would grow up in a community that was thriving rather than declining, that was connected rather than isolated, that was hopeful rather than resigned. They would learn the valley's traditions, would participate in the festivals, would understand that they were part of something larger than themselves. Some of them would leave eventually, would seek opportunities elsewhere, would build lives in other places. But they would leave knowing they had a home to return to, a community that valued them, a place that would always welcome them back. And some of them would stay, would take over their parents' farms and businesses, would continue the work of maintaining and improving the community. They would tell their own children about the time when Pelican Town was dying, when the community centre was a ruin, when it seemed like the valley's best days were behind it. They would tell them about the farmer who came from the city, who took over the old farm, who worked with the Junimos to restore the community centre and bring the magic back to the valley. The story would become part of Pelican Town's history, part of its mythology, part of what defined the community's identity. Your grandfather's farm would continue for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own improvements and innovations while maintaining the core values that made it special. The land would be cared for, respected, worked with rather than exploited. The animals would be treated well, raised with care and compassion. The crops would be grown sustainably, without depleting the soil or poisoning the water. The farm would be a model for how to work with the land rather than against it, how to be productive while also being responsible, how to make a living while also making a life. The valley itself would remain beautiful, protected by the community's commitment to preserving what made it special. The forest would stay wild, home to the Junimos and countless other creatures. The mountains would stand eternal, their peaks snow-covered even in summer. The river would run clean and clear, supporting fish and wildlife. The beach would remain pristine, a place where people could connect with the ocean and find peace. The valley would be a refuge, a place where the natural world and human community existed in balance, where progress didn't require destruction, where prosperity didn't demand exploitation. Let your mind drift now, like a boat on calm water, moving gently with currents you don't need to understand or control. There were still challenges, of course. Life in Pelican Town wasn't perfect, wasn't a fairy tale where all problems were solved and everyone lived happily ever after. People still struggled with personal issues, still dealt with depression and anxiety and relationship problems. The economy still had ups and downs, good years and bad years, times of plenty and times of scarcity. The weather didn't always cooperate, sometimes bringing droughts, or floods, or unseasonable frost that damaged crops. The valley was still isolated, still remote, still lacking some of the conveniences and opportunities that cities offered. But the difference was that people faced these challenges together as a community, supporting each other through difficulties. When someone's crops failed, neighbours helped them get through the season. When someone was struggling with mental health, friends showed up and reminded them they weren't alone. When the economy was bad, people found creative solutions, bartered and traded, helped each other survive until things improved. The community wasn't perfect, but it was strong, and that strength came from the connections between people, from the shared commitment to taking care of each other. The community centre remained the physical embodiment of this commitment, the place where people gathered to make decisions collectively, to celebrate together, to support each other through hard times. The building was maintained carefully, repairs made promptly, the space kept clean and welcoming. The Junimos blessing remained strong because the community remained strong, because people continued to honour the values that had made Pelican Town special: cooperation, mutual support, respect for the land, commitment to the common good. Mayor Lewis eventually retired, his decades of service finally coming to an end. The town held an election to choose his replacement, and the process was democratic and fair, everyone's voice heard and valued. The new mayor brought fresh energy and ideas while also respecting the traditions and values that defined Pelican Town. The transition was smooth, a sign of the community's health, of its ability to adapt and change while maintaining its core identity. Pierre's general store thrived under the next generation's management, Abigail eventually taking over from her father and bringing new ideas while maintaining the personal service that made the store special. The Stardrop Saloon continued under Gus's management, remaining a gathering place where everyone felt welcome. Robin's carpentry business stayed busy as the growing community needed new buildings and renovations. Harvey's clinic served an expanding population, providing quality medical care to everyone who needed it. Each business adapted and evolved while maintaining the values that made them part of the community, rather than just commercial enterprises. New businesses opened as the population grew and new opportunities emerged. A bookstore opened, providing books and hosting readings and book clubs. A bakery opened, filling the town with the smell of fresh bread and pastries. A flower shop opened, providing arrangements for celebrations and decorations for homes. Each new business added to the community's vitality, provided new gathering places, created new connections between people. The economy diversified, became more resilient, less dependent on any single industry or business. The farms around the valley continue to produce abundantly, each one unique, each farmer bringing their own approach and priorities. Some focused on crops, growing vegetables and fruits and grains. Some focused on animals, raising cows and chickens and pigs and sheep. Some focused on artisan goods, making wine and cheese and cloth and oil. Some did a bit of everything, diversifying to spread risk and maximize opportunities. But all of them shared a commitment to sustainable practices, to working with the land rather than exploiting it, to being part of the community rather than just pursuing individual profit. The younger generation brought new ideas and technologies to farming, finding ways to be more efficient and productive while also being more sustainable. They used precision agriculture techniques to minimize waste and maximize yields. They implemented renewable energy systems to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. They developed new markets for their products, connecting directly with consumers who valued locally grown, sustainably produced food. They honoured the traditional knowledge of their parents and grandparents, while also embracing innovation and change. The valley became known beyond its borders as a model for rural community development, for how a declining town could be revitalised through community effort and commitment to shared values. Researchers came to study what had happened in Pelican Town, to to understand how the community had reversed its decline, to learn lessons that might be applied elsewhere. Journalists wrote articles about the valley, about the farmer who had restored the community centre, about the Junimos and their magic, about the power of community to overcome economic and social challenges. But the people of Pelican Town didn't let the attention change them, didn't let outside recognition make them forget what mattered. They remained focused on their community, on taking care of each other, on maintaining the values and practices that had brought them back from the brink. They welcomed visitors who came to learn, shared their stories and their knowledge, but they didn't try to become something they weren't. Pelican Town remained a small rural community, and that was exactly what made it special. Let your breathing become so slow and gentle that you're barely aware of it, each breath automatic and effortless, carrying you deeper into peace. The Junimos remained in the forest, watching over the valley, their blessing woven into the land itself. They appeared occasionally, small colourful figures glimpsed at the edge of vision, reminders that the valley's magic was real and present. Children who played in the forest sometimes saw them, sometimes received small gifts, a perfect apple, a beautiful flower, a shiny stone. The Junimos didn't interact with humans the way they had during the community centre restoration, but their presence was felt, their blessing was tangible, their magic was part of what made the valley special. The wizard continued his studies in his tower, watching over the mystical elements of the valley, maintaining the balance between the magical and mundane worlds. He was less isolated than he had been, occasionally coming to town for festivals and gatherings, slowly becoming part of the community he had observed from a distance for so long. His daughter, whoever she was, grew up knowing she was loved even if she didn't know the full truth of her heritage. The wizard's story remained one of loss and loneliness, but it was also a story of quiet dedication, of protecting the valley from threats most people never knew existed. The witch remained in her swamp, bitter and isolated, unable to let go of the jealousy that had transformed her. The wizard still loved her, still hoped that someday she might find peace, might release the anger that consumed her. But some transformations are permanent, some choices can't be undone, and the witch seemed content in her bitterness, seemed to prefer isolation to the vulnerability of connection. Her story was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how jealousy and paranoia can destroy love, how holding on to anger hurts the person holding it more than anyone else. Krobus continued to live in the sewers, or perhaps moved to a farm if someone befriended him enough to invite him. Either way, he found peace in the valley, found acceptance from at least some humans, found that he didn't have to live in fear and hiding. His friendship with the dwarf continued, two survivors of an ancient war choosing peace over hatred, choosing connection over division. Their story was a small one, easily overlooked, but it represented something profound about the possibility of reconciliation, about how even the oldest wounds could heal if people chose to let them. The mines continued to be dangerous, continued to be home to monsters and valuable resources. Adventurers descended into the depths seeking ore and gems and the thrill of combat. The Adventurers Guild provided support and rewards for those brave enough to explore the mines, maintaining a presence that kept the monster population under control. The mines were part of the valley's economy, providing resources that couldn't be obtained elsewhere. But they were also a reminder that the valley wasn't entirely safe, that danger existed alongside beauty, that the land demanded respect. The desert remained harsh and unforgiving, the Skull Cavern an endless descent into darkness and danger. Few people ventured there, and fewer still descended to significant depths. but those who did brought back iridium and other rare materials, resources that were valuable enough to justify the risk. The desert was part of the valley's larger ecosystem, connected by the bus that Pam drove, accessible but not welcoming, a place that tested those who entered it. The beach remained a place of peace and beauty, the ocean vast and mysterious, full of life and possibility. Willie continued to fish there, maintaining his simple life, finding contentment in the rhythm of tides and seasons. The beach was where people went to think, to find perspective, to remember that their problems were small compared to the vastness of the ocean. It was where Eliot had written his novel, where Leah had found inspiration for her art, where countless townspeople had found peace during difficult times. The forest remained wild and deep, home to the Junimos and countless other creatures. It was a place of magic and mystery, of beauty and danger, of resources and risks. People foraged there for mushrooms and berries and other wild foods. They gathered wood for building and crafting. They explored its paths and clearings, discovering hidden places and secret groves. But they also respected it, understood that the forest was not theirs to control or exploit, that it existed on its own terms and demanded respect from those who entered it. The mountains stood eternal, their peaks visible from everywhere in the valley, a constant presence that provided perspective and stability. The mines were carved into the mountains, the quarry extracted stone from them, but the mountains themselves remained largely untouched, too vast and ancient to be significantly affected by human activity. They were a reminder of the valley's age, of the fact that humans were temporary residents in a place that had existed long before them and would exist long after them. The river flowed through the valley, connecting the mountains to the ocean, providing water for crops and animals, supporting fish and other aquatic life. It was the valley's lifeline, the source of its fertility and abundance. People fished in the river, swam in it during summer, skated on it during winter when it froze. The river was part of everyone's daily life, a constant presence that shaped the valley's character and supported its prosperity. Let your whole body feel like it's floating now, weightless and free, held by darkness, safe and warm and completely at peace. The history of Pelican Town was a story of cycles, growth and decline, prosperity and struggle, connection and isolation. The town had been built by people who worked together, who supported each other, who created something larger than themselves. It had thrived when the community was strong, when people gathered at the community centre, when the Junimo's blessing flowed through the valley. It had declined when the community fractured, when people stopped gathering, when Yoya Corporation's influence spread and the magic faded. And it had been restored when someone cared enough to do the work, when the community remembered what it had forgotten, when the Junimo's blessing was renewed. The story wasn't unique to Pelican Town. Countless rural communities had experienced similar cycles, had watched their young people leave, had seen their economies decline, had felt the slow erosion of everything that made them special. Some of those communities had died, had faded away entirely, had become ghost towns or been absorbed into larger urban areas. But some had survived, had found ways to adapt and thrive, had discovered that community and connection and commitment to shared values could overcome economic and social challenges. Pelican Town's story was a reminder that decline isn't inevitable, that communities can be restored if people are willing to do the work. It was a reminder that magic is real, not in the sense of supernatural powers, but in the sense of what happens when people come together, when they support each other, when they commit to something larger than themselves. The Junimos blessing was real, but it was also a metaphor for what happens when a community is strong. The land is more productive, the people are happier, the future is brighter. Your grandfather had understood this. He had lived through Pelican Town's golden years, had watched its decline, had hoped that someone would come along who could help restore it. He'd given you the farm not just as an inheritance, not just as an escape from your corporate job, but as an opportunity to be part of something meaningful, to help a community remember what it had been, to contribute to building a better future. He had trusted that you would understand what needed to be done, that you would care enough to do it, that you would honour his legacy by continuing the work he had started. And you had done that. You had taken the overgrown farm and made it productive again. You had worked with the Junimos to restore the community centre. You had built relationships with your neighbours, had shown them that community mattered, had helped them remember what they had forgotten. You had participated in the traditions, had supported local businesses, had contributed to the collective effort that had brought Pelican Town back from the brink. You had honoured your grandfather's legacy not by preserving the past exactly as it had been, but by helping create a future that embodied the values he had cherished. The farm would continue after you, would be passed down to the next generation, would remain a productive part of the valley's economy, and a symbol of what was possible with hard work and love for the land. The community centre would continue to serve as the heart of Pelican Town, would host gatherings and celebrations and meetings for generations to come. The traditions would continue, would evolve and adapt while maintaining their core meaning. The community would continue to thrive, would face new challenges and find new solutions, would remain strong because people continue to choose connection over isolation, cooperation over competition, community over convenience. This was the history of Pelican Town, not just a story of what had been, but a story of what could be, of what happens when people care enough to fight for their community, when they work together toward common goals, when they remember that they're part of something larger than themselves. It was a story that was still being written, that would continue for generations, that would be told and retold as part of the valley's mythology and identity. And you were part of that story. Not the only part, not even the most important part, but a part nonetheless. You had shown up when the town needed someone. You had done the work when everyone else had given up. You had believed in the community when belief seemed foolish. You had helped restore what had been broken, had helped remember what had been forgotten, had helped create a future that was brighter than the past. Your grandfather would have been proud. The people of Pelican Town were grateful. The Junimos had blessed the valley. And you had found what you were looking for when you left the city, when you opened that letter, when you took the bus to Stardew Valley. You had found purpose, had found community, had found a life that mattered. You had found home. Let your thoughts fade completely now, like stars disappearing at dawn, leaving only the gentle darkness of sleep, peaceful and complete. The valley was quiet at night, peaceful in a way that the city never was. There were no sirens, no traffic, no constant hum of urban life. Just the sound of wind through trees, the occasional call of a night bird, the gentle rustling of animals moving through the darkness. The stars were visible here, thousands of them, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. The moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the fields and forests, making everything look magical and dreamlike. You would stand outside your farmhouse sometimes late at night, just looking at the valley, at the life you had built, at the community you had helped restore. The fields were planted with crops that would feed people, that would contribute to the valley's prosperity. The barn and coop housed animals that were healthy and well cared for. The artisan equipment was producing goods that people valued. The farm was productive and sustainable, a model for how to work with the land rather than against it. But more than that, the farm was home. It was where you belonged, where you had found purpose and meaning, where you had built a life that mattered. The city felt like a distant memory now, like something that had happened to someone else. The corporate job, the cubicle, the fluorescent lights, the meaningless work, all of that was gone, replaced by something real and tangible and good. You had made the right choice when you opened your grandfather's letter, when you quit your job, when you took the bus to Stardew Valley. The people of Pelican Town were your family now, not by blood, but by choice, by shared experience, by the bonds that form when people work together toward common goals. You knew their stories, their struggles, their dreams. You had helped them when they needed it, and they had helped you in return. You had celebrated with them during good times and supported them during bad times. You were part of the community, woven into its fabric, essential to its continued thriving. The seasons would continue their cycle, spring following winter, summer following spring, fall following summer, winter following fall, year after year, generation after generation. The crops would be planted and harvested, the animals would be born and raised, the festivals would be celebrated, the traditions would be maintained. The community centre would host gatherings, the Stardrop Saloon would be full of laughter, Pierre's store would serve customers, Robin would build and repair, Harvey would heal, Gus would welcome everyone to his saloon. Life would continue in Pelican Town, not perfect but good, not without challenges but full of meaning, not isolated but connected. The valley would remain beautiful, the land would remain productive, the community would remain strong. The Junimos would watch from the forest, their blessing woven into everything, their magic part of what made the valley special. The wizard would study in his tower, the witch would brood in her swamp, Krobus would find peace in the sewers or on a farm. The dwarf would remember the ancient war but choose peace, and you would continue to work your farm, to participate in the community, to be part of the ongoing story of Pelican Town. You would plant crops in spring, harvest them in fall, care for your animals year-round, create artisan goods, explore the mines, fish in the river and ocean, forage in the forest, participate in festivals, maintain friendships, support your neighbours. You would do the work that needed doing, not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it mattered, because it contributed to something larger than yourself, because it was part of building a life and a community that had meaning. This was what your grandfather had wanted for you. Not just to escape the city, not just to take over the farm, but to find purpose and meaning, to be part of a community, to build a life that mattered. He had given you the opportunity, had provided the farm and the letter and the hope that you would understand what needed to be done. And you had understood. You had done the work. You had honoured his legacy. You had found what he wanted you to find. The night was peaceful, the valley was quiet, the stars were bright overhead. The farm was yours, the community was yours, the life was yours. You had built it through years of work, through dedication and care, through showing up every day and doing what needed to be done. You had helped restore what had been broken, had helped remember what had been forgotten, had helped create a future that was brighter than the past. And now, as you stood outside your farmhouse, looking at the valley in the moonlight, you felt something you hadn't felt in years, maybe hadn't felt ever. You felt complete. You felt like you were exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were supposed to be doing, living exactly the life you were supposed to be living. You felt at peace. Let that peace wash over you now, gentle and complete, filling every part of you, releasing every tension, dissolving every worry. Let yourself sink into it. Let yourself be held by it. Let yourself rest in it. You don't need to do anything. Don't need to think about anything. Don't need to be anywhere but here, in this moment, in this peace. The valley is quiet. The night is peaceful. The stars are bright. And you are home. Let yourself drift now, like a leaf on a gentle stream, moving without effort, going without resistance, simply floating toward sleep, toward rest, toward peace. The story of Pelican Town continues, but you don't need to follow it anymore. You can let go, can release your attention, can simply be. Breathe slowly. Feel your body heavy and warm. Let your thoughts fade. Let sleep come. You are safe. You are home. You are at peace. Good night.